The Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. My name is Joni Siegel, and I'm the host for this podcast. My husband, Steve Siegel, is the producer of the podcast. We hope that our podcast is giving you a message of hope and help. That is our whole purpose in doing this podcast. Just a reminder to please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a 5-star rating. Also, if you could check out our YouTube channel and give us a thumbs up there, that would be great. Thank you so much. Today we are interviewing a gentleman named Danny Strong. Danny Strong is a multi-award-winning writer, director, actor, producer who is the creator, showrunner, and director of the hit Hulu series Dopesick, starring Michael Keaton and Rosario Dawson. He was also the co-creator, executive producer, writer, and director for the hit Fox series Empire. He also wrote the screenplays for the films Recount, Game Change, The Butler, Rebel in the Rye, which he also directed, and co-wrote the Hunger Games, Mockingjay, Part 1 and 2. He won 2 Primetime Emmy Awards, 2 WGA Awards, a Peabody, and a Golden Globe Award for Game Change, and earned a Primetime Emmy nomination for Recount. As an actor, he's appeared in major roles in a number of iconic TV shows and films, including Billions, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Gilmore Girls, Justified, Girls, and Mad Men. The reason why we've invited Danny to be on the podcast is because of the series Dopesick, which tells the story of the unethical and criminal marketing by Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family. I am excited to hear about how Danny became involved in that project and some stories involved with it. So without further ado, let's talk to Danny Strong. So Danny Strong, filmmaker par excellence. Thank you for being willing to be on the podcast today and sharing your story.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, awesome. I'm excited. I'm really excited to have you here. But Danny, tell us just a little bit about your background, kind of like where you grew up, what got you interested in making films, kind of what led you down the path to make Dopesick.
What led me on the path to make Dopesick? Well, how far do you want me to go back?
You can go back as far as you want. Like, where did you grow up? Did you do films as a kid? How'd you get involved?
So I grew up in Manhattan Beach, California, which is it's about an hour south of Los Angeles. And when I was a kid, it's a very wealthy community now, but it wasn't when I was a kid. It was a very sort of middle to lower middle class, sleepy beach town. With surfers and skateboarders and volleyball players. And that was sort of the environment I grew up in. And I was always interested in acting and did high school theater, and then was a college, went to theater school for college at USC. So my path was always as an actor. And then I started writing when I was about 25. So when I graduated college, I actually started booking jobs as an actor and worked all through my 20s as an actor, but wanted to do something else as well because I didn't find it as fulfilling as I thought it would be. Sort of like the dream comes true. I'm supporting myself as an actor. But so I started writing, and that was a big focus of my attention. And then I sold my first script as a writer when I was 32. So it took me 7 years of writing scripts before I finally sold my first project, which was the movie Recount, about the Florida recount that was the HBO movie Recount that starred Kevin Spacey and Tom Wilkinson and Laura Dern. And the film did very well, won the Emmy for Best TV Movie and Best Director. And I was nominated for Best Writer. And that was sort of my big kind of breakthrough as a writer, was that project.
That's awesome. And I can, I can relate because our son moved to LA to be an actor, and he didn't book acting gigs because he realized about 9 months into it that what he wanted to do was write. So I kind of know that story of you write and you just keep writing.
Yeah, it became sort of therapy for me to get my mind off my auditions because it was this creative outlet that I could do. And I did pretty well as an actor. I was on a number of really great shows during that time period, guest starring and recurring, but nonetheless, even though I was working all the time, I was still unemployed all the time as an actor. So it it was a great outlet for me that eventually, and I knew by the time I was 28 or 29 that I wanted it to take over, but I didn't know how long it would take. And then it was when I was 32 is when I sold the first thing, like I said.
Yeah, it's not bad. That's only 4 years. That's not bad.
7 years. It was 7 years of writing.
Well,
I started before I sold my first thing.
That's right. You did say that. I just meant 4 years from when you went, okay, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. Okay.
Yeah.
So, what then led you to Dopesick? How did that all come about?
So I had written and directed a film about a young J.D. Salinger called Rebel in the Rye that got into Sundance, and a producer had seen the film, this guy named John Goldwyn, and he really loved the movie. And he came to me and said, do you want to write and direct a movie on the opioid crisis? Is your next thing? And I thought, well, that's interesting. I was looking to do something that was sort of a modern day piece of muckraking, like I had done with Recount, or this other movie that I'd written called Game Change, which was about John McCain picking Sarah Palin, another HBO election movie. And I wanted to do something similar to those projects. Partly because of the J.D. Salinger piece was a period piece, and I just wanted to do something that was sort of hot button modern day story. And I thought, well, opioid crisis, that's exactly that. So I started researching it.
I was just going to say, were you aware of the opioid crisis? Because I wonder sometimes.
This was 2018, I think January-ish, 2018. And I had read the New Yorker article on the Sacklers that Patrick Radden Keefe had written that had really blown the story up, specifically the Sackler family's ownership of Purdue Pharma and Purdue Pharma's role in igniting the opioid crisis. So I started, and that's what he had wanted to do, John Goldwyn. He said, let's do a movie about the Sacklers. So that was how it was presented to me. So then when I started researching it, I was horrified by the actions of this company and shocked, stunned. I couldn't believe what they had did, the extent of the lies, the extent of the deception. And I also thought, I think this is a lot bigger than just the Sacklers. I thought there's so many elements to this story that I don't want to do just a story about a rich family that's running this company that's lying through their teeth, right? I thought that's one part of the story for sure and fascinating. But it seemed to me that there was an approach like the movie Traffic. And that was my idea of it in the earliest stages was, this will be like Traffic, but the opioid crisis, where we're going to be at all of these different levels or areas of the story. And then when I read about Rick Mountcastle's investigation and John Brownlee, the U.S. attorney, his boss, the case they brought, and that the DEA also had a case, I thought, well, that's a really great way into this story, because as an active investigation, you're now working in a genre that has crowd-pleasing qualities to it, which is a mystery, investigators looking for clues, a crime being committed. And I thought, wow, a story like this really needs that kind of engine, because the story itself of the opioid crisis and of addiction is so harrowing and awful and horrifying and depressing. And so how can this piece not get completely weighed down by that? Because no one would make it, right? So how can you do that story and tell that story, but not make it, how can there be another engine in there that can have some kind of entertainment value as well? And I thought, okay, well, I could do it as a thriller. And what's great about that sort of way to do it is that what these investigators are exposing are the crimes of Purdue Pharma. So it's a great way to indict the company that created the opioid crisis by showing the investigators, uncovering how they did it. And then I thought, well, but we have to have the victims as well, and just tell that story. So then I thought, okay, well, that's where I came up with the whole Traffic approach. Like I said, it was like, okay, so we'll have the victims, we'll have the investigators, we'll have Purdue Pharma. And that was sort of, and then I thought, this is too much material for a movie. And I went back to John Goldwyn and said, what about a limited series? Why don't we do it and he loved the idea. And then I went and I sold the project to a studio I had a deal at, which was called 20th studios, which are part of the Disney empire. And then here's where the story gets a little weird, or a little, I don't know if weird's the word, but I sell the show to 20th. A lot of what I just explained to you is what I said to them, although I had more worked out and I had these, more storylines worked out. And then another division at Disney, but not 20th, but the sister studio called Fox 21 doesn't know that I've sold this project to 20th. And they go and buy the book Dopesick in a big bidding war.
Oh, wow.
And I read about it on Deadline. So I literally read on Deadline that my sister studio has bought a rival project to the project that a month ago I had just sold to the other studio.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And those studios have merged since then, probably because of things like that, right?
Yes.
Sort of. So they asked me if I would team up with Fox 21 and with the book Dopesick. And I said, well, why don't you send me the book? Like, why don't I read this book? So I read the book, and it hadn't come out yet. So I didn't even know the book existed when this was all taking place. I read the book. I thought the book was really wonderful. I thought it was really powerful. And then I had a meeting with Beth Macy, and I loved her. I thought, oh, she's terrific. And to have an expert, she really wanted to be in the writer's room full time. And I thought, well, I have an expert on the subject in the room the full time. And then I pitched her the pitch that I sold the 20th, and she loved it. She thought, well, that's terrific. It totally captures the spirit of what my book is. And then she had this producer named Warren Littlefield, who's just one of the great TV producers. So we all merged together, and that was how Dopesick was sort of off to the races.
That's great. It's a fabulous story. And I love the story about the two kind of sister studios going, wait a second, we're both going after the same thing. I will tell you that your podcast and some of the other ones that we've done with Beth Macy and Ed Bish and people who are involved in the story, when I say to people, you need to watch Dopesick, I always say, if it were just a really, really good drama, like a made up story, it would be scary. But the fact that it's true, it's absolutely horrifying. Yeah. And I know, at least I got my son and his wife to watch it, because if you don't watch it, you don't know. You really don't know. Yeah. Even if you have a loved one who's addicted to opioids, part of my hope with shedding the light on Dopesick and shedding the light on the book is that people need to know this story. They need to know what happened. And I like to think if I had lost a child to opioid addiction, that this would help me somewhat understand how this sort of thing came about. Okay, so now you've got the green light. You're moving ahead. Tell us some stories about making the film, what you learned while you were making the film.
Well, I never stopped learning. I'm still keep learning, even now that it's over, and new facts continue to arise. It was an incredibly rewarding experience because we did have a sense of mission on it. At the time, the Sacklers, they'd been exposed by that terrific New Yorker article, and then Ann Golden was conducting her protest, but there still wasn't this sort of visceral understanding of what that company actually did. And there was a sense of, we're going to give them the trial that they never got, that they've gotten away with this, but we're going to show people what actually happened. But then there were some other, just as important missions behind the piece, to redefine the sort of general understanding of opioid addiction, where people view it as a moral weakness, as opposed to, no, these people's brains have been hijacked, literally hijacked, and they cannot live without it, or they're in so much pain, they think they're going to die. Yep. And they will turn their back on everything in their life to not experience that pain. And that's the word Dopesick, right? That's where the word Dopesick comes from.
Yep.
That's why I love the title so much, because it captures what this truly is at its core. And to understand that is pretty profound for some people. particularly the response to the show, I've gotten responses from people who had gone through an opioid use disorder. And they're like, oh my God, this is what happened to me. Or relatives of like, I wish I would have known this is what my mother or my brother or my sister or child were actually going through, because I would have approached it differently, or maybe I'm approaching it differently now. And I've gotten messages on Twitter about people reaching out to kids that they haven't spoken to in years because they had so much contempt and anger for their child, as opposed to realizing from the show, oh no, my child's brain was hijacked. And so all of that's been really profound and quite moving. And then the other thing that was—
Did you expect that, just as a side note?
Did you? No,
I
didn't even know what to expect. You don't, when you put something like this together, you don't know if anyone's ever going to watch it. So you're like, I'm just going to do the best I can and create something that I think's great. And one of my philosophies as a writer and as a director producer is to just aim the bar really, really high, like try to hit a home run. So if you don't quite get a home run, maybe you'll get a triple, and that's really good, right?
Yeah.
It's always sort of how I approach things and that's by over the years, by approaching things where I didn't have a high bar, where I was trying to hit a double and I didn't even get to first base, and it's very unrewarding. So it's sort of like aim big. And the fact that it's had the impact that it's had has been amazing. And it's what I love to do in the things that I've worked on. It's the most satisfying part of anything I've ever worked on. Are the projects where it's the most exciting for me aren't necessarily the ones that have made the most money or have had the biggest ratings, but have made the most noise, that have become news stories, that have become in some ways a piece of activism or controversial because they're creating a firestorm of discussion. I love that. That is literally the most exciting thing for me. And Dopesick has done it in a way of as big as anything I've ever worked on, of the nonstop news stories about it, and just those messages that I was talking about of how it's changed people's lives has been so profound and moving and rewarding on so many different levels.
I really applaud you, Danny. I do.
Oh, thank you.
And it's obvious when there's a series like that is as impactful as it is, that you were just all about the money. It's very obvious with what you were doing. I think that's what really makes a filmmaker successful, is when they're doing it because it's something that they're passionate about. It's why we do the podcast, because we're passionate about this subject. And another thing, and believe me, I never get critical in these things because I don't want to, but I know that at least one person that had emailed me and said something like, it's, the Dopesick is dramatized or whatever, or it's not like, it's not a documentary. And here is my response to that, Danny. What you dealt with in terms of subject matter in Dopesick, and this is my opinion, is pure evil on the part of Richard Sackler and some of the individuals at Purdue Pharma. People can't confront that. Okay. So when it's just a down and dirty documentary, I think a lot of people cannot necessarily confront that. But the fact that you had fabulous actors with fabulous performance, kudos to Michael Keaton winning his Golden Globe. And, the fact that you made it entertaining, if you will, even though you did not lessen the crisis that we are facing with the opioid epidemic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Of course. Yeah, no, and look, that would be the biggest criticism of it, if in fact it did that, if it cheapened it or made it seem trivial or used it as entertainment in a way that sort of betrayed the true horror of what happened. But what it does is it's there to explain and shine a light on that horror of what happened and that evil that you're talking about.
You are listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information on the podcast, or to reach out if you have a story you would like to share with us, go to our Facebook page by the same name, or you can email us at theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com, or go to our website, theaddictionpodcast.com, or call us at 727-314-7080. And please remember to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a 5-star review. Sometimes the hardest thing about getting someone into recovery is getting them to agree to treatment. Bobby Newman, a certified drug counselor with 30 years experience and an over 85% success rate as an interventionist, has created a series of 12 videos that you can use right now to learn every step to get your loved one to agree to treatment. Call 1-833-918-0008 today and say the word podcast to get a 10% discount. Or go to newmaninterventions.com and type in the word podcast for a 10% discount. This service comes with a free 1-hour consultation with Bobby.
And the sort of the dramatization criticism is a very legitimate criticism if the piece is bad, or if
Good point.
Is unfair,
Yep.
or if the piece is inaccurate in a way that becomes irresponsible.
Good point.
Those are, well, then that's a fair criticism. But that hasn't been the criticism of the show.
It's not the case with the show.
The show has been that it's fantastic and people are loving it and it's sort of blowing their minds as far as the information they're getting.
Exactly.
So that hasn't been, I've done a number of these projects at this point, the true life, nonfiction stories, those 2 ones I mentioned, Recount and Game Change.
Yep.
And those were incredibly accurate pieces. Still with some dramatization, but they're very responsible, so much integrity, very accurate. And the people that want to discredit it, they're just going to discredit it. And they're going to try to discredit it in a way where they're not going to try and pick it apart, which is what I thought they would do, And I was like, I'm crossing my T's and dotting my I's, and I had all these
checking my facts.
Yeah. And I have many consultants on this one too. But what I've learned is that what they just say is it's all lies. It's a dramatization. They try to use the fact that it's a dramatization to discredit the entire thing. And that's a common sort of technique I've encountered.
And I think that is such a fallacy because, as I say, I think the dramatization makes it more, I hate to say entertaining, but, it makes it more something that people are going to want to watch. And maybe they came in because, Michael Keaton's in it or Peter Sarsgaard is in it. But when they leave it, that's not going to be the impression. That's not the impression you get. I watched the very first episode and I said to my husband, that's it. We have to get some of these people on the podcast because this is a story that we have to cover in what we do because we need to shed the light. And that's what you did. You didn't just shed the light. You took a spotlight and you put it directly on Purdue Pharma and directly on the Sacklers. And it had to be done. And you did it in such a professional, artistic, and aesthetic way, if you will, so that it is such a fabulous miniseries and it deserves all the kudos. And
thank you.
I really hope it wins even more awards. I was so excited when I saw it.
I hope it does too. I'm with you.
Yeah, but not just for you, because when it wins awards, people are going to watch it. Do you know?
100%.
And it has to be watched.
Or at the end of the day, is to shine a light on the project and because it's a subjective competition. It's not like the World Series where the best team won. Right. It's truly just subjective in people's taste at the end of the day. And what they do is they just bring more attention to the projects themselves.
Yep.
And this one's, it really did make a lot of noise and it continues to grow. People continue to come to it. That's sort of one of the exciting things about streaming and the world we're living in entertainment is it's not about that week or that month. It could be a 6-month, a 1-year period where people come to a project.
Yep. And I think this one is definitely going to live on for quite a while. And I said to, we had Cynthia Munger on the podcast. Do you know Cynthia? Have you ever met her? Okay. She has a son who's addicted to opioids. I think he's now clean and sober, if I remember correctly. And she's very involved with the parents who are, demonstrating in Washington, D.C. and are all about this. And, as I've said, and I'm going to say it again, people are going to get tired of hearing me saying it. The Sacklers may have enough money to where they can win in the courtroom, but they are never going to win in the public arena. And with the internet and with series like Dopesick, they're not going to win, and they can't hide anymore. And I think that that's important, because I think for decades, they were hidden. I mean, I didn't know that Arthur Sackler was behind the whole Valium epidemic. I didn't know it, and I think that people are getting wiser. They have to,
Well, that was a big mission of the show. What you're talking about, it was exactly kind of the core purpose of the show, which is people need to know what they did. Their crimes need to be documented for history. And when I first started it, and this was before I even teamed up with Beth Macy, I had read that they were now, because they had been exposed in medical circles in the US by 2018 and opioid prescribing was dropping significantly, they were now using these same techniques internationally, and the same dishonest, manipulative, deceitful lies. They were going to country after country. And so I viewed the show as a warning to the world that Purdue Pharma is coming to addict you. They're coming to lie to you. They're coming to sell you their poison. And it was a major motivation for the piece for me in the early days, was as an international warning of what this company and what these people are doing. By the way, I've never had a project where the goal was like, what are you doing? An international warning. But that's literally what it was. And I think that's happening now. I think we're getting a lot of worldwide play, and really need to give a shout out to Hulu for making it. This wasn't some no-brainer. No one wanted to make it. Everyone just thought, even with me telling them, no, I'm going to execute it as an investigative thriller for a huge portion of it, the response was, yeah, but it's still too depressing. It's still the opioid crisis. It's still too dark. And everyone passed. And then Hulu stepped up and said, we'll do it. And, it seems like a no-brainer now because the show's successful, but it was not at that early stage when we were trying to set it up.
I get that. And I agree. Hulu definitely needs to be commended for putting it together, or greenlighting it and helping you, because I think it is doing what you expected it to do. And not only is it giving an international warning, but, people need to understand that this isn't just the case with OxyContin. This is likely the case in most of the drugs that get prescribed. And it is up to us as individuals and patients and consumers to question, these things and get the research. And if you ever thought that you could just completely 100% trust your doctor with everything that your doctor tells you, well, this series is going to tell you maybe not. Maybe that's not such a good idea. And it wasn't that the doctor involved was a bad man. We know that there are pain pill doctors. We've talked about some of them on the podcast who were all about the money, and that's all they did. I mean, here you had a doctor who actually really cared about his patients, but he was lied to flat out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole thing, I think the perception of it pre-Dopesick or other types of, stuff that's come out like this was that it was fueled by, Purdue Pharma lying, but also these dishonest pill mills, and that we have the opioid crisis because of these dishonest pill mills. Now, they certainly were a part of it, but there was way more prescribing by doctors who thought that they were doing the right thing, that was more prevalent than the pill mills. And a lot of pill mills were shut down. A lot of people went to prison over it. But there were an enormous number of doctors that just believed what they were sold by Purdue. And it was the FDA label that said that it was less addictive than other drugs, combined with article after article that were coming out in 1996, 1997 about what a breakthrough this was. So I personally was fascinated by how that happened, because in 2018, when I'm researching 2019, it feels like, oh, well, of course, this is a very addictive drug. How could a doctor possibly think this? And then when you start to peel the layers back, and then you see the level of deception and manipulation by having independent pain organizations, being quoted in articles when in fact they weren't independent. They were financed by Purdue Pharma, and that it was almost like an elaborate shell game that worked its way all the way to the highest levels of the U.S. government. It's a level of deception, and it's diabolical, and it's unbelievable how successful it was. At the end of the day, how something that was so fundamentally dishonest that an addictive opioid was in fact non-addictive is pretty mind-boggling what they were able to achieve.
So what I was going to say, and again, when I've described the series and I've told people you have to watch this series. So Steve and I, just as background, we had a marketing company. We have a marketing company. And we were introduced to the whole medium of podcasting. And so I can do that. I can talk to people. I can interview people. That would be great. And then someone suggested that we podcast about something we were passionate about. And even though we don't have a close family member that is addicted and or we haven't been addicted, we just felt that we needed to take responsibility, similar to the way you did when you did this film. So that's why we do this. But what I have said to people about this is that Purdue was brilliant in their marketing. OMG. Creating pain associations, like you said. Getting the guy who said, it's pseudo addiction, and the solution for pseudo addiction is to up the dose. I mean, it's so diabolical, but it's brilliant. It's just, anyway.
Well,
scary.
That was why I wanted to show a flashback of Arthur Sackler testifying before the Kefauver Committee in 1962. To show, no, this is the family business. They've been doing this for decades.
Yep.
And in fact, it was all created by the famous uncle who's not even alive during their launch of OxyContin. But he had created all of these dishonest techniques that they used to market and sell OxyContin.
Yep. It's horrific. The story is horrific. Danny, I was just going to say, I was going to give you a hard time because I was going to say, now what you need to do is continue to follow along with the Sacklers and make another movie, but I'm not trying to tell you what to do. And the only reason I said that, I was looking up, when I watched the series, I started looking up the names of some of the people involved, like some of the executives at Purdue and the guy who created the pseudo addiction, and they're still in the business, and they're still peddling the same lies, just maybe not through Purdue, but anyway.
Yeah, David Haddix, who's the godfather of pseudo addiction, that's one of those that I still have a hard time understanding how it was so effective. When I talk to, because it seems ridiculous in a 2019 lens, right? It seems kind of absurd and almost like satire.
Yep.
But I started talking to a few doctors about it. And they both said the same thing about pseudo addiction was we weren't pain specialists. We were general practitioners. So it seemed like it was, something that we just didn't know about because we hadn't studied it, as a specialist.
That's interesting.
And then it was a world of specialists. This was a legitimate phrase if you were a specialist in that world.
Right.
And so much of their manipulative phrases, breakthrough pain, pseudo addiction,
individualized dosing,
individualize the dose, right? there was this massive pain movement at the time, and pain was being redefined, and JACO had changed their standards for what doctors should do in opioid prescribing, and hospitals now were pushing opioids really aggressively because they didn't want negative reviews from patients that had left, and that if you left in pain, it could have been a legal liability if you were still in pain, right? So there were so many things that were happening simultaneously at this time, but they weren't organically happening. It was all manipulated by the pharmaceutical industry itself.
Yep.
Very much spearheaded by the actions of Purdue.
Yep. And the Sacklers. Amazing. Danny, I can't thank you enough, not only for talking to us today, but for even doing this project. What you've created with Dopesick is going to save lives. It just is. And it's going to mend families, as you said, who did not understand or do not understand that Dopesick is a real physical thing that happens to addicts. It's not just that they can't just go, oh, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to take it anymore. And I think that in so many aspects, your miniseries just, it's really good. I'm really glad you did it.
I really appreciate you saying that. And for me, it's certainly been one of the most rewarding things I've ever worked on. And I'm really proud of the piece, and I'm really proud of the entire company of people that came together to make it. There's so many people that were involved, and Hulu for financing it when no one else would.
You're a rock star, Danny. I mean, really.
Oh,
and you've got to be in demand now and super busy. And I cannot thank you enough for being willing to talk to us today, because this is such an important aspect of the whole addiction pandemic. Thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And thank you for shining a light on it and on this issue with the podcast. So back at you.
And we will continue.
Please do.
I believe this is the last interview that we have that focuses on the Hulu miniseries Dopesick, based on a book written by Beth Macy. And the miniseries is directed and created by Danny Strong, that we just heard from. If you have not watched Dopesick, I would rather that you watch that than listen to our next podcast. It's that important, and it is so eye-opening that you need to know what's in that series. It is shedding a light on some of the most unethical, diabolical, legal actions taken by a pharmaceutical company and a family that has been doing it for decades and has raked in billions from unethical, illegal, and diabolical marketing. So there you go. That's Dopesick. I will give you my pitch once again. If you or someone you know needs to get into treatment, please don't wait. Please do it now. And we'll be back again next week with another interview.
You have been listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information, reach out to us on Facebook or go to www.theaddictionpodcast.com. Our email is theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com.